Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into a pretty hefty stack of source material. We've got the CRISC Domain 2 study guide, the review manual. Basically, we're doing a really thorough examination of IT risk assessment and evaluation.
That's right. And this isn't just about, you know, ticking boxes or finding flaws.
No, it's much more than that. It's about giving leaders the structure, the language, the quantifiable data they need to make genuinely smart business decisions when it comes to cyber risk.
Exactly. Our goal here is to equip you with that structure, that vocabulary, and the core methodologies. We want to help you move past simply spotting vulnerabilities.
And into a structured evaluation process, right? One that actually prioritizes risk based on how it could impact the business itself.
Precisely. We'll be breaking down the key frameworks.
Yeah.
Models like STRIDE and the analysis methods like quantitative scoring. The aim is for you to be able to clearly articulate residual risk to stakeholders.
Okay, let's get started then. Let's unpack this right from the very core concept. Risk. It fundamentally ties back to business objectives, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Okay.
Our sources, particularly the CRISC materials, define risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And it's crucial to remember that effect isn't always negative.
Right, it could be an opportunity, something positive, but usually in this context, we're focused on the negative side, the threat.
We are. But when we talk about managing risk, there's a fundamental premise we just have to accept up front.
Which is?
You can never, ever eliminate risk completely. It's just not possible. Any system, any process, anytime humans are involved, there's uncertainty.
So the whole point of risk management, according to these governance frameworks, isn't zero risk, it's strategic.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. You weigh the cost of putting controls in place against the realistic probability and the potential impact of a risk actually happening.
Because if the controls end up costing more than the worst-case scenario they're designed to prevent.
Then you're not managing risk effectively. You're basically just wasting resources, wasting capital.
Okay, so to figure out that potential impact, the first thing we need to nail down is what's actually valuable. What are we trying to protect? This brings us to assets.
Yes, assets. And generally, we split these into two main categories.
You've got your tangible assets first. These are the obvious ones, right?
The physical stuff. Hardware, servers, buildings, network gear, things you can touch, things that show up clearly on a balance sheet. They're concrete.
But then there are the intangible assets, and this is where it often gets, well, more complicated, but also potentially much more critical, especially today.
Absolutely. This is where the really disruptive risks often hit hardest. We're talking proprietary information, trade secrets, patents, strategic plans.
But also things like brand reputation, customer trust, even just operational credibility.
Think about it. If a confidentiality breach leaks your core product designs, the damage to that intangible asset, your intellectual property, could dwarf the cost of replacing whatever hardware was compromised.
And losing customer trust. That can literally sink a business faster than, say, a temporary denial of service attack.
No question. So once we've identified what we're protecting, both tangible and intangible, we need a common language to talk about how it can be harmed.
And that's where the CIA triad comes in. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The bedrock.
The absolute bedrock. Let's quickly define them. Confidentiality is all about preventing unauthorized disclosure. Simple concept, huge implications.
Think data leaks, industrial espionage. If sensitive information gets into the wrong hands, confidentiality is gone.
Then there's integrity. And it's really important to distinguish this from confidentiality. Integrity isn't about secrecy.
It's about the data itself being accurate, consistent, trustworthy, unaltered.
Exactly. Maintaining that the data is correct and reliable. If an attacker changes a bank balance, tampers with source code, or maybe deletes logs to cover their tracks, that's an integrity breach.
And the consequences there can be immediate and devastating, financially speaking. You suddenly can't trust your own information.
Right. And the third leg of the stool is availability. This is all about ensuring reliable and timely access to systems and data for legitimate users. It's the foundation of business continuity.
So if ransomware locks everything up or a DDoS attack floods the network, availability is compromised. The business can't function.
And the key point for you listening is this. Every single risk scenario we discuss, every threat actor, every control measure, it's all ultimately designed to protect one or more elements of that CIA triad as they apply to your organization's critical assets.
It's the fundamental language of information security. Everything maps back to CI or A.
Okay, so we know what we're protecting and how it can be damaged in principle. Now let's get into the mechanics of an attack.
Our sources lay out a pretty clear attack equation, if you were. You need three things to come together for a risk event to happen.
That's right. You need a threat that's the actor, or maybe an event like a natural disaster. You need a motive, the intent behind the action, whether it's financial gain, political disruption, espionage, or just chaos.
And critically, you need a vulnerability that's the weakness, the flaw in the system or process that can actually be exploited.
And if you can break that chain, remove any one of those three elements, the attack simply can't succeed. The risk doesn't materialize.
So let's start with the who, the threat actors. We often use the HAT system to categorize them, right?
We do. It's a useful starting point. You have your white hats. These are the ethical hackers. They find vulnerabilities, but they do it responsibly, often through formal channels like bug bounty programs. They're trying to help secure systems.
Then the opposite end of the spectrum, black hats. These are the malicious actors. Their intent is harmful theft, destruction, extortion.
But, as you mentioned earlier, it's often not that black and white. There's a lot of gray area.
Like the gray hats. These are tricky. They might hack into a system without permission, which is illegal.
But then maybe they report the flaw, perhaps publicly, perhaps demanding a small fee. Their motives and methods land them in this ethically ambiguous zone.
And then you have hacktivists. Their motive isn't usually financial, it's political or social.
Right. They use hacking techniques, maybe website defacement, DOS attacks to promote a specific cause or protest against an organization or government. The methods might be illegal, like a black hat's, but the driving force is different.
But for many organizations, the most significant risk today comes from the really sophisticated groups. The advanced persistent threats, or APTs.
Yes, APTs. These are often state-sponsored groups or highly organized, well-funded criminal enterprises. The name itself tells you a lot about them.
They're advanced, meaning they use sophisticated techniques, custom malware, often zero-day exploits that nobody else knows about yet.
They're persistent. They're not just looking for a quick smash and grab. They want long-term stealthy access. They'll install backdoors, use encrypted channels, and try to remain undetected for months, even years.
And they're targeted. They have specific high-value objectives: stealing national intelligence, corporate intellectual property, disrupting critical infrastructure. They know who they're going after and why.
The sources give us some well-known examples, which really helps illustrate the scale. Think of groups like APT-28, also known as Fancy Bear, often linked to disruptive political goals, using things like spear phishing.
Or APT-29, Cozy Bear, known for incredibly stealthy, long-term reconnaissance and major supply chain attacks, like the SolarWinds incident.
Dealing with threats at this level requires more than just basic defenses. You can't just rely on antivirus signatures. You need advanced techniques like behavioral analysis to spot their activities.
And we absolutely have to talk about the threat that's already inside the gates. The insider threat.
Oh, absolutely. Insiders, employees, contractors, anyone with legitimate access can be incredibly dangerous. They don't need to breach the perimeter defenses. They're already inside.
They misuse the access they've already been granted.
Exactly. Mitigating this requires a layered approach. Technical controls like strict least privilege access and robust separation of duties are essential.
But the non-technical controls are just as important, aren't they?
Crucial. Things like thorough background checks before hiring, security awareness training, and even mandatory vacation policies. That last one might sound odd, but forcing someone else to cover a role can often uncover fraudulent or malicious activity that was being hidden.
Okay, let's shift from the who to the how. The vulnerability. What exactly is it?
Simply put, it's a flaw, a weakness. It could be in software code, a system configuration, an operational process, or even in human behavior. Anything that an attacker can exploit to cause harm.
And we generally categorize these.
Yeah, broadly into two types. You have technical vulnerabilities. These are things like software bugs, open network ports, unpatched systems, weak encryption implementations, the nuts and bolts.
And then the non-technical vulnerabilities. These often tie back to people and processes.
Right. Lack of security awareness training, poorly defined procedures, weak password policies, failure to enforce existing policies, that sort of thing.
And this brings us squarely to the human element, often called the weakest link, exploited through social engineering.
Ah, yes, social engineering. The art of manipulation. Tricking people into revealing information or performing actions they shouldn't.
We're all familiar with phishing, right? Those mass deceptive emails trying to get credentials or install malware.
And its more targeted cousin, whaling. This is phishing aimed specifically at high-profile targets, CEOs, CFOs, the C-suite. The attackers do their homework.
I read about a case that was fascinating. This attacker spent months studying the CEO's emails, mimicking their writing style, learning project names. The resulting email was incredibly convincing. It wasn't just a technical trick, it was deep psychological manipulation.
It often is. And don't underestimate the effectiveness of physical social engineering tactics either. They still work surprisingly well.
Like piggybacking or tailgating, just following someone through a secure door.
Exactly. People tend to be polite. They hold the door. They often don't challenge someone who looks like they belong, even if they don't recognize them. It bypasses sophisticated locks with simple human nature.
And the classic dumpster diving. It sounds almost comical, but
But the amount of sensitive information, printouts, notes, old hard drives sometimes that gets thrown out improperly is genuinely shocking. It's a basic failure procedure of non-technical controls.
same goes for shoulder surfing. Just looking over someone's shoulder to snag a password or see sensitive data on a screen. Low tech, but effective in the right environment.
So once these vulnerabilities, technical or non-technical, are found, the governance process kicks in. We need a way to track them and, more importantly, prioritize them based on severity.
This is where the formal systems come in. CVE is the starting point.
Correct. Common vulnerabilities and exposures. CVE. Every publicly known vulnerability gets assigned a unique ID, like CVE 2024 something something. It's like a serial number for flaws.
But crucially, the CVE number itself doesn't tell you how bad the vulnerability is.
Not at all. For that, we need the CVSS, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. This provides a numerical score, typically from 0 to 10.
0 being low risk, 10 being critical. This helps prioritize remediation efforts, right? Patch the 10s first.
Generally, yes. But if we're doing a deep dive, we need to understand CVSS isn't just one simple score. It's actually composed of 3 metric groups.
Ah, okay, so what are they?
First is the base score. This reflects the intrinsic qualities of the vulnerability itself. How easy is it to exploit? Does it require user interaction? What's the impact on confidentiality, integrity, availability? This score is static. It doesn't change.
Okay, the inherent severity. What else?
Then you have the temporal metrics. These adjust the score based on factors that change over time. Is there exploit code publicly available? Is there an official patch? Has the vendor confirmed the issue? These make the score more current.
Makes sense. And the third?
This is the most important one for internal risk assessment. The environmental metrics. This allows an organization to customize the CVSS score based on its specific environment.
How so?
Well, think about it. A critical vulnerability might exist in a piece of software, but is that software running on a publicly accessible web server processing credit cards? Or is it on an isolated internal test machine?
Right, the context matters hugely.
Exactly. The environmental metrics consider factors like what security controls are already in place that might mitigate this specific vulnerability, compensating controls. How critical is the affected system to the business? This tailored score is far more useful for real-world prioritization than just the base score alone.
So using the full CVSS, especially the environmental score, is key for accurate risk-based decision-making, not just looking at the initial 0-10 number.
Precisely. And we also have to acknowledge the ultimate challenge here. Zero-day vulnerabilities.
The ones nobody knows about yet except the attackers.
Correct. They're unknown to the vendor, so there's no patch available when they're first discovered being actively exploited. Defending against these requires a different mindset.
You can't rely on patching if there's no patch.
Exactly. It emphasizes the need for defense in depth, multiple layers of security controls, and sophisticated detection methods, like behavioral analysis, that can spot anomalous activity even if the specific exploit isn't recognized. It's a tough governance challenge.
Okay, let's transition to the actual malicious software used in attacks. The malware types. I think most people have a basic grasp of viruses needing user action to spread and worms self-replicating across networks.
Yes, those are the classics. But the key thing with modern malware is its sophistication and how it tries to evade detection.
Take the Trojan horse. The basic idea is simple. Malware disguised as legitimate software.
Right. But modern Trojans are often far more complex. They might be modular, acting as a dropper that downloads and installs other, more specialized malicious payloads once inside the network. This makes them very versatile and harder to fully eradicate.
And the one everyone fears most financially, ransomware. Encrypts data, demands payment, usually crypto. What are the nuances here for risk management?
Well, one key distinction is between online and offline ransomware. Online variants need to communicate with a command and control server to get encryption keys.
Which means if you can isolate the infected machine quickly,
you might prevent the encryption completing. Offline ransomware, however, often has pre-built encryption keys embedded within it. It can execute and encrypt even if the system is completely disconnected from the network.
That makes recovery much harder if backups aren't sound.
Extremely. And from a risk treatment perspective, the standard advice is always never pay the ransom. Rely on backups and recovery plans. But we have to acknowledge the operational pressure to pay, especially if backups fail or the downtime costs are catastrophic, can be immense. It's a difficult real-world decision.
We mentioned evasiveness. Rootkits are notorious for hiding deep in the system, often at the kernel level, making them very hard to detect and remove.
Yes, they fundamentally compromise the operating system's integrity. But perhaps the most sophisticated evasion technique we see commonly now is fileless malware.
Fileless, meaning no traditional malicious file is written to the disk.
Exactly. It operates entirely in the system's memory, RAM. It achieves this by hijacking legitimate, trusted system processes and tools that are already present on the machine.
This is the living off the land, or
Yes.
LOTL technique.
Precisely. The malware uses built-in tools like PowerShell, WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation, maybe even scripting languages like Python if they're installed. Because these are legitimate, signed operating system components. Traditional antivirus software that scans files on disk often completely misses them.
So detection requires looking for anomalous behavior of these trusted tools, not just scanning for known bad files.
That's the key. You need endpoint detection and response, EDR tools, behavioral analysis, memory analysis, much more advanced capabilities.
Finally, let's touch on attacks focused purely on the A in CAA: availability, denial of service,
Great.
and distributed denial of service, DDoS.
The core idea is to overwhelm a target system or network so legitimate users can't access it. The main difference is scale. DDoS comes from a single source.
DDoS uses a large network of compromised computers, a botnet, to launch the attack from many sources simultaneously.
Which makes DDoS far harder to mitigate. Blocking one source is easy, blocking thousands or millions is a major challenge.
And these attacks aren't all the same, are they? There are different types.
Correct. We generally categorize them based on the layer of the network stack they target. You have volume-based attacks like UDP floods or ICMP floods. These just try to saturate the network pipe with sheer traffic volume.
Just overwhelming bandwidth.
Then there are protocol-based attacks, things like SYN floods or the old ping of death. These exploit weaknesses in network protocols themselves, often exhausting resources like connection tables on firewalls or servers.
And perhaps the trickiest to deal with.
Often, yes. The application layer attacks. These target layer 7, the application itself. Examples include HTTP floods or slow LoRS attacks.
Why are they harder to detect?
Because they often mimic legitimate user traffic. Instead of a massive flood, they might send many seemingly valid requests like logging in, searching, adding to cart, but do so in a way that slowly consumes all the application server's resources, like its web server threads or database connections.
So it doesn't look like a typical network flood. It looks like lots of users hammering the application until it falls over.
Exactly. Detecting and mitigating these requires application-specific knowledge, rate limiting, and behavioral analysis at the application level, not just looking at network traffic volumes.
Okay, that's a solid overview of the threats and vulnerabilities themselves. But effective risk assessment can't just be reactive, waiting for things to pop up. We need to be proactive.
And that's precisely where threat modeling comes into play. It's absolutely fundamental for any organization serious about managing risk proactively.
So what is it, fundamentally?
It's a structured, systematic process. You evaluate a system, an application, maybe even a whole business process, but you do it thinking like an attacker. The goal is to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities early, ideally during the design phase, so security can be built in, not bolted on later.
And importantly, it helps align those security efforts with what the business actually cares about.
Critically important, the CRISC materials outline a common 5-step process for threat modeling.
Okay, let's walk through those. Step 1.
Identify business objectives and define scope. You have to know what system or process you're modeling and why it matters to the business. What are the crown jewels here? Map the business ecosystem. This means decomposing the system, understand the data flows, the trust boundaries between components, the key processes, the entry and exit points. Visual diagrams are often used here.
Step 3 is where the specific frameworks come in.
Yes. Identify and prioritize threats. This is where you apply a structured methodology, like STRIDE or PASTA, to systematically brainstorm potential threats based on the system map from step 2.
Then step 4, develop mitigation strategies. For the prioritized threats, you figure out what controls, technical or procedural, can prevent, detect, or respond to them.
And finally, step 5, review, validate, and iterate. Threat modeling isn't a one-off activity. Systems change, threats evolve. You need to regularly revisit and update the model.
Okay, let's talk about those frameworks used in step 3. STRIDE seems to be one of the most common, especially for software.
It is. STRIDE is an acronym that helps categorize threats based on the security property they violate.
Let's break it down. Yes.
Spoofing. Pretending to be someone or something else violates authentication.
Yeah.
Tampering. Modifying data or code illicitly violates integrity.
Oh.
Repudiation. Denying having performed an action. Violates non-repudiating controls like logging, information disclosure. Exposing sensitive data to unauthorized parties. Violates confidentiality. Denial of service. Preventing legitimate access. Violates availability.
And E.
Elevation of privilege. Gaining higher level access than authorized. Violates authorization controls.
So STRIDE gives you a comprehensive checklist, especially powerful when designing or reviewing software applications early in the SDLC.
Exactly. It forces developers and architects to think about these specific threat categories. Now, contrast that with something like DREAD.
DREAD sounds ominous.
It does. It's another acronym. Damage potential, reproducibility, exploitability, affected users, and discoverability.
How is it used differently from STRIDE?
DREAD isn't primarily for identifying threats. It's a simpler framework used for prioritizing threats that have already been identified, maybe using STRIDE or another method. You assign a quick score, like 1, 3, or low, medium, high, to each DREAD category for a given threat.
So it helps you quickly rank a potentially long list of threats to figure out which ones need attention first.
Precisely. It's less detailed than STRIDE, but faster for triage and prioritization, especially when dealing with many potential issues.
What about PASTA? That one sounds more involved.
It is. PASTA stands for Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis. It's a much more rigorous, 7-stage, risk-centric methodology.
7 stages. What makes it different?
PASTA puts a very strong emphasis on aligning the technical threats with the business context and impact from the very beginning. It includes stages for defining business objectives, defining the technical scope, decomposing the application, analyzing threats, analyzing vulnerabilities, modeling attacks, and analyzing risk impact.
So it explicitly simulates attacks and ties everything back to business risk.
Yes, that's its core strength. It really forces a deep understanding of how a technical flaw could lead to a significant business consequence. It's great for justifying security investments to executives because it speaks their language, risk, and impact. But
It sounds resource-intensive.
it definitely is. It requires significant time, expertise, and collaboration across different teams. It's powerful, but maybe not practical for every single application or system.
And then there are specialized frameworks, too, like Linden.
Right.
Yeah.
Linden is a great example of a specialized model.
Okay.
It focuses exclusively on privacy-related threats.
So crucial with GDPR and other data privacy regulations.
Absolutely. Linden stands for linkability, identifiability, non-repudiation, detectability, data disclosure, unawareness, and non-compliance. It helps ensure that systems handling personal data are designed with privacy principles in mind from the start. If you're dealing with PII, Linden is incredibly relevant.
So once you've used these frameworks to identify and prioritize threats, you need to document them properly. This is where risk scenarios come in.
Exactly. A risk scenario isn't just bad guy hack server. It's a detailed narrative. It needs to include specific elements.
Like?
The specific threat actor involved, for example, organized crime group, disgruntled insider. The attack vector they use, your example, exploiting CVE 2024 CRISC via a phishing email. The specific asset impacted, for you to do the customer database. The tangible business consequence, AG estimated $2 recovery cost, loss of 10% customer base, regulatory fine.
And importantly, the resulting residual risk after considering existing controls.
Yes. These detailed scenarios make the risk concrete and understandable, especially for non-technical stakeholders.
And you can develop these scenarios in different ways, top-down or bottom-up.
Correct. Top-down starts with the big picture, the key business objectives or processes. You ask, what are the major things that could stop us from achieving this objective? And then work down to identify the specific threats and vulnerabilities.
And bottom-up.
It starts with the known weaknesses. We know we have this unpatched server, or our password policy isn't enforced. Then you ask, who could exploit this, how, and what would the worst outcome be?
So ideally, you use a mix of both approaches to get comprehensive coverage.
That's the best practice. Top-down ensures alignment with business priorities, while bottom-up make sure you address known technical weaknesses.
And linking this back to building secure systems, the software development lifecycle, SDLC threat modeling, helps define security requirements early on.
Absolutely. We all understand functional requirements, what the system needs to do. But security largely falls under non-functional requirements, how the system should perform.
Things like performance, reliability, usability,
Yeah.
security.
Right. Security requirements like all sensitive data must be encrypted at rest using AES 256, or user authentication must require multi-factor authentication, are critical non-functional requirements that need to be defined early, often informed by threat modeling.
This also relates to the idea of use cases versus misuse cases.
Exactly. A use case describes how a legitimate user interacts with the system to achieve a goal. e.g., user logs in, searches for product, adds to cart. Standard stuff.
A misuse case or abuse case, however, describes how a malicious actor might try to interact with the system to exploit it.
Right. For example, attacker attempts to inject malicious script into the search field, or attacker tries to bypass payment verification. Thinking through these misuse cases during the design phase is essentially a form of threat modeling focused on user interaction points. It helps identify where controls are needed before coding even starts.
Okay, we've identified threats, modeled scenarios. Now we need to analyze and evaluate them. We need to figure out how bad these risks really are so we can decide what to do about them. What are the main ways we do this analysis?
Broadly speaking, there are three main methodologies outlined in the CRISC materials and common practice. First up is qualitative analysis.
Qualitative, so using descriptive terms.
Exactly. You use scales like high, medium, low, or maybe a 1 to 5 ranking for both the likelihood of the risk occurring and its potential impact. It's often visualized using a risk matrix or heat map.
What are the pros and cons here?
Pro. It's relatively fast, doesn't require complex calculations or tons of precise data, and it's good for initial screening or triage. It relies heavily on expert judgment, sometimes using structured techniques like the Delphi method to build consensus.
Con.
The big con is subjectivity. What high impact means can differ between people or departments. It makes it hard to compare different types of risks objectively, and it doesn't easily translate into financial terms for cost-benefit analysis.
Okay, so if qualitative is subjective, the alternative is quantitative analysis.
Right. Quantitative aims for objectivity using numbers, specifically financial figures. The goal is often to calculate things like the annualized loss expectancy, ALE.
ALE, that's the expected monetary loss from a risk over a one-year period, right?
Yeah.
Calculated from single loss expectancy, SLE, and annualized rate of occurrence, ARO.
Precisely. SLE is the estimated financial loss from a single incident, and ARO is how many times you expect that incident to happen per year. ALE uses SLE, ARO. This approach allows for direct cost-benefit analysis. If we spend $50 on this control, it will reduce our ALE by $200K.
Sounds like the ideal approach then. Pure numbers, clear financial justification.
It's the gold standard in theory.
Mhm.
The big challenge, though, is getting reliable data, especially for the ARO. How often will a novel cyber attack occur? Historical data might not exist or be relevant.
And assigning a precise dollar value, SLE, to things like reputational damage or loss of customer trust can be really difficult and, ironically, subjective itself.
Exactly. So while quantitative is powerful, it can be very data-intensive, time-consuming, and might require making significant assumptions, especially for intangible impacts.
So given the limitations of both pure qualitative and pure quantitative,
The most common approach in practice is often a semi-quantitative or hybrid method.
combining the two, how does that work?
Essentially, you might start with qualitative ratings, like high, medium, low, or 1 to 5 scales for likelihood and impact. But then you assign numerical values or weights to those ratings. You can then combine these scores mathematically, maybe multiply likelihood score by impact score to get an overall numerical risk score, perhaps on a scale of 125 or 100.
So it provides a more granular ranking than just HML, making prioritization easier.
Yes, while still leveraging expert judgment where precise financial data is lacking. It retains context, but allows for more objective comparison and tracking than pure qualitative. It's a pragmatic compromise.
Okay, so we have a risk score, however derived. Now we need to consider the controls we already have in place. This brings us to inherent risk versus residual risk.
A critical distinction. Inherent risk, sometimes called gross risk or uncontrolled risk, is the level of risk that exists before you apply any specific controls to address it. It's the risk inherent in the activity itself.
Like the risk of having customer data just by running an e-commerce site.
Exactly. Residual risk, or net risk controlled risk, is the risk that remains after you've implemented controls. Your goal is to reduce inherent risk down to an acceptable level of residual risk.
And there's a formula for this, right? Something like residual risk, inherent risk. 1, control effectiveness.
That's the conceptual formula, yes. The inherent risk score, adjusted downwards based on how effective your controls are believed to be.
But how do you measure control effectiveness? That seems like another area where subjectivity could creep in. You might think your firewall is 90% effective, but is it really?
That is the core challenge in making this calculation meaningful. Control effectiveness isn't just a guess. It should be based on evidence.
Evidence like?
Control testing results, penetration test findings, audit reports, metrics from security tools like patch compliance rates from your vulnerability scanner or detection rates from your EDR. A mature organization doesn't just assume controls are effective. They continuously verify effectiveness through monitoring and assessment.
So relying on actual data and testing rather than just confidence is key to getting a realistic residual risk score.
Absolutely essential for credible risk governance. Overestimating control effectiveness leads to underestimated residual risk, which is dangerous.
Okay, so we have our residual risk score. Now we need to compare it against the organization's tolerance for risk. This involves understanding a few key terms: risk capacity, risk appetite, and risk tolerance.
Yes, these define the boundaries. Let's start with the risk capacity. This is the absolute maximum amount of risk the organization can possibly withstand without jeopardizing its fundamental objectives or even its survival. Think of it as the ceiling.
The point beyond which things really break.
Right. Then there's risk appetite. This is a higher-level strategic statement, usually set by the board or senior management. It defines the amount and type of risk the organization is willing to take on to achieve its strategic goals.
So a tech startup might have a higher appetite for risks associated with rapid innovation than, say, a conservative financial institution.
Exactly. It reflects the organization's strategic posture towards risk-taking.
And finally, risk tolerance. How does that differ from appetite?
Tolerance gets more specific and operational. It's the acceptable deviation from the risk appetite. If the appetite is low for data breaches, the tolerance might quantify that, setting specific thresholds, like no more than X number of minor security incidents per quarter, or zero tolerance for breaches involving sensitive customer PII.
So appetite is the general willingness. Tolerance sets the specific limits and triggers for action.
That's a good way to put it. Tolerance translates the strategic appetite into practical, measurable boundaries that operational teams can work within. The residual risk score needs to fall within these tolerance levels.
And if a risk's residual score is outside the tolerance,
Then action is required.
yeah,
But before we get to treatment, there's one more crucial piece: risk ownership.
assigning responsibility.
Yes, every identified risk needs a designated risk owner. This is typically a manager or executive who has the authority and accountability to make decisions about how that risk will be treated and to ensure the treatment plan is implemented effectively. Without clear ownership, risks often fall through the cracks.
All right, so a risk has been analyzed, scored, found to exceed tolerance, and assigned an owner. Now, what does the owner do? This is where risk treatment strategies come in. The sources usually list 4 main options, sometimes called the 4 Rs.
That's right. The first option is risk acceptance. This is a conscious, informed decision to take no further action to reduce the risk.
Why would you do that?
2 main reasons. Either the residual risk is already deemed within the organization's tolerance levels, or the cost of implementing further controls outweighs the potential benefit, the reduction in risk. The key is that it must be a documented, deliberate decision, not just ignoring the risk.
Okay, acceptance. What's next?
The most common strategy: risk mitigation or risk reduction. This involves implementing controls, technical, administrative, physical, to lower either the likelihood of the risk occurring or its potential impact if it does occur, or both.
So patching vulnerabilities, implementing MFA, conducting security training, those are all mitigation efforts.
Exactly. Third option, risk avoidance.
Yeah.
This is more drastic. It means deciding not to start or to cease the activity that gives rise to the risk.
Like deciding not to launch a new online service because the associated security risks are deemed too high and can't be adequately mitigated within budget.
Precisely. Or maybe discontinuing business in a particularly high-risk region. You eliminate the risk by eliminating the activity.
And the 4th R?
Risk transfer. This means shifting the financial impact of the risk to a third party. The most common examples are buying cyber insurance or outsourcing a specific function or process to a vendor who then assumes the associated operational risk, though the primary organization often retains reputational risk.
Insurance is a big one here, but it's important to remember insurance typically only covers certain financial losses.
That's a critical point. It might cover incident response costs, legal fees, maybe some fines, but it rarely, if ever, fully compensates for long-term reputational damage, loss of customer trust, or lost future business opportunities. Transfer is a financial tool, not a substitute for good security practices.
We should probably also mention the unofficial fifth option, risk ignorance.
Ah, yes. The worst option. This isn't a strategy, it's a failure. Either failing to identify risks in the first place or deliberately choosing to ignore known risks without formally accepting them. This inevitably leads to nasty surprises down the road.
So assuming we choose mitigation, we implement controls. These controls themselves can be categorized based on their function.
Yes. The sources typically describe several categories. First, preventive controls. These aim to stop an incident from occurring in the first place.
Like firewalls blocking unauthorized traffic, encryption protecting data, strong authentication like MFA, preventing unauthorized access.
Correct. Then you have deterrent controls. These don't physically stop an attacker, but they aim to discourage them from trying.
Like warning banners on login pages, unauthorized access prohibited, visible security cameras, or maybe even the threat of prosecution.
Exactly. Third, directive controls. These mandate certain behaviors through policies, standards, or procedures, like an acceptable use policy or mandatory security awareness training. They direct people on how to act securely.
If prevention fails, what's next?
Detective controls. These are designed to identify and alert that an incident is happening or have already happened.
Intrusion detection systems, IDS, security monitoring tools, SIEMs, log analysis, internal audits, they find the problem.
Right. And once detected, you need corrective controls. These aim to fix the problem and restore systems to normal operation after an incident.
Like restoring data from backups after a ransomware attack, patching a vulnerability that was exploited, or automated failover to a redundant system.
And finally, there's an important category called compensating controls. These are used when a primary required control cannot be implemented for some legitimate reason.
Like,
Maybe you have a critical legacy system that simply cannot be patched or upgraded due to technical limitations or extreme cost. A compensating control might be to isolate that system on its own heavily restricted network segment, with extra monitoring and strict access controls at the boundary to make up for the inherent weakness of the system itself.
so it's an alternative measure to reduce risk when the preferred control isn't feasible.
Exactly. The selection, implementation, and ongoing management of all these controls should ideally be guided by established frameworks.
Frameworks provide structure and consistency, which are the key ones mentioned in the CRISC context.
The NIST Risk Management Framework, RMF, is very prominent, especially in U.S. federal government and related industries. It's a very structured, six-step lifecycle process.
Those steps are: categorize the system, select the appropriate security controls, implement the controls, assess their effectiveness, authorize the system to operate, a formal sign-off by senior management, and continuously monitor the controls. It's quite rigorous and compliance-focused.
It is. Then there's the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF. This one is less of a strict implementation standard and more of a voluntary guidance framework. It's organized around 5 core functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Many organizations use it to assess their current cybersecurity posture and identify areas for improvement across these functions.
And internationally.
ISO standards are key. ISO 31000 provides general guidelines for enterprise risk management across the board, while ISO 27005 specifically provides guidance on information security risk management, complementing the broader ISO 27001 standard for information security management systems, ISMS.
Regardless of the specific framework chosen, the underlying theme is that risk management is not a one-time project. It's continuous.
Absolutely. The vulnerability management lifecycle is a perfect example of this continuous process.
Walk us through that cycle again.
It starts with asset inventory. You can't protect what you don't know you have. Then regularly scanning systems for known vulnerabilities, followed by risk assessment and prioritization using tools like CVSS, considering the business context, to decide what to fix first. Then remediation, actually applying patches or implementing configuration changes, ideally testing them first. And finally, post-remediation validation rescanning to confirm the vulnerability is actually gone. And then the cycle repeats.
And to make sure this cycle is effective and that residual risk stays within acceptable limits, we need ongoing monitoring using metrics.
Yes. 2 key types of indicators are often mentioned: key risk indicators, KRIs, and key performance indicators,
Well,
KPIs.
that's the difference.
KRIs are forward-looking indicators designed to be early warnings that risk levels might be increasing before an incident happens. Examples might include number of days critical patches are overdue, an increase in phishing email click rates, or a rise in failed login attempts against key systems. They signal potential trouble ahead.
And KPIs.
KPIs are backward-looking indicators that measure the performance and effectiveness of the controls you already have in place. Examples: percentage of systems compliant with the security baselines, mean time to detect intrusions, MTTD, mean time to respond recover, MTTR, percentage of employees who completed security training. They tell you how well your current defenses are operating.
So KRIs warn you about rising risk. KPIs tell you how well you're currently managing it.
A good summary: monitoring both, along with regular internal and external audits, reviewing incident reports, analyzing logs with proper separation of duties for log access, and even gathering user feedback. All of this feeds back into the continuous improvement loop.
It ensures the risk assessment remains current, controls are working as intended, and the organization can adapt to the ever-changing threat landscape.
Precisely. It's about maintaining that accurate picture of the organization's security posture and ensuring it stays aligned with the defined risk appetite and tolerance.
Which really brings us full circle, doesn't it? We started with the defining risk in the context of business uncertainty. We walked through identifying assets, understanding threats and vulnerabilities using models like STRIDE, analyzing and quantifying risk using methods like qualitative and quantitative analysis, setting boundaries with appetite and tolerance, and finally, treating risk and managing controls within frameworks like NIST or ISO, all underpinned by continuous monitoring with CRIs and KPIs.
The comprehensive process. And the main takeaway, I think, is that effective IT risk assessment isn't just a technical exercise performed in isolation. It's an ongoing organization-wide effort that requires structure, methodology, and clear communication.
Using those structured approaches, threat modeling, careful analysis, defining residual risk against tolerance, that's how you translate complex technical issues into clear business terms that support informed decision-making.
Exactly. It's about enabling the business to take calculated risks, not flying blind. The governance processes provide that map and compass.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final thought we want to leave our listeners with?
Well, here's something to consider. We spent a lot of time worrying about, the sophisticated zero-day exploits, the APTs, the really complex attacks that make headlines. And those are real threats, absolutely.
But maybe they aren't the biggest day-to-day threat for many.
Often, no. I think the truly significant weakness in many organizations isn't the unknown unknown. It's the systematic failure to consistently address the known knowns. It's the unpatched systems that linger for months, the weak passwords, the lack of basic security hygiene, the human vulnerabilities exploited by simple phishing or social engineering over and over again.
So the provocative thought is, the true measure of a mature security posture might not be how many advanced tools you own or how well you defend against theoretical nation-state attacks.
Perhaps not. Perhaps the true measure is the clarity and consistency of your risk culture, your organization's actual commitment to continuous learning, to fixing the fundamental weaknesses that everyone knows are there, and to making sure residual risk genuinely aligns with that carefully defined appetite and tolerance. It's about mastering the basics relentlessly.